One reason that for many years, despite the trials and tribulations and the stresses that this job here on television is all about, that it's worth it. Because when something truly historic happens, you are watching it with you, with the people of India, watching it happen. I have never seen in the past 10 years, in times of terrorism, in times of great global strife, a more pointed, clear, action plan driven, aggressive speech by an Indian Prime Minister. The entire world has been reminded of the service that India has given. It has been reminded of the great work that India is doing in global service with its own citizens. And it has been told that the UN system has got to change. It has to change now. It has failed. Rivers of blood have flown across the world. World War III may not have happened, but wars have happened, and the UN has not lived up to all that it promised. This is a very aggressive speech. Let me quickly open up Ambassador Vasidhi Mukherjee, ma'am. What do you make of this? Ambassador.
I agree with you, Rishabh. It was a very statesmanlike speech which corresponded to the need of the hour. On one hand, this was an emerging great country. Its leader is showing that leadership. He focused on all the main areas where the multilateral system is either grappling with successfully or unsuccessfully or needs to strive further. It gave the clear message that without UN reform and without India being right in the center of the multilateral governance system, the Security Council, this system is going to keep faltering. It gives a strong commitment of the support of India to the process. And he gave a clear listing of the achievements multilaterally that we've done so far, be it the International Day of Non-Violence, be it the Day of Yoga, or be it the International Solar Alliance, which again helps to underline as Prime Minister.
He's ticked off. He's ticked off all the people. You were talking about the left, left liberal lobby in America. Well, he's ticked it off. Look at the maternity leave for women, micro loans to women, Solar Alliance. These are all hard left Democrat issues in America, which is what the Americans don't understand about this country. If Modi talks about a Solar Alliance, then you still call him a fascist. The traditional definitions of America don't apply here in India. The gauntlet, General Katoch, has been thrown. Rivers of blood has flown, says India's Prime Minister. How long will the people of India be made to wait?
Oh, I think, just prior to the Prime Minister's address, I think we were discussing the issue whether he will make a pitch for the UN Security Council permanent membership. And I think he has made that pitch in his very first sentence. And that I presume is a very, very positive step. Now, from here, as you were talking about earlier, Rishabh, of putting all the ducks in a row, I think this is the first step in putting those ducks in a row.
I thought this would be the end step of the ducks in a row. Let me just take you one by one, General Katoch, what he has said. We've been there as a founding member. The world of 1945 was much different from today. Entire global environment has changed. The idea with which the UN was formed reflected that time. Today is a totally different era. The needs and challenges are different. There is a big question before the world. Can an organization like the UN still be rooted in 1945? If times change and we don't change, we become weaker. The UN has many achievements, but there are many examples needing deep introspection. Yes, it's true that World War III did not happen, but we cannot ignore that many wars have indeed happened. Terror attacks have scarred the world. Rivers of blood have flown. Lakhs of innocents have died. Many have lost their homes and dreams. Then and now, were the efforts of the UN enough? Question mark. General Katoch, if somebody had to show up a mirror in a very bold fashion, that has just happened.
Yes, I think the mirror has been shown absolutely appropriately. And along with showing the mirror, I think what the Prime Minister stated was India's role in a future reformed United Nations. I think I was really very impressed with the words which he used, where he said that we need to move from, we need to inform, reform, and then transform. Now, that is a very, very clear vision which was laid out as far as the world is concerned, and India's role in it has to be central. So I think the pitch which we
Okay,
have all been looking
he's done
for
what
for
the
many
Indian
years
Prime Minister's
has
job
finally
is to
been
do,
made.
to make it about India. He's not made this about China or Pakistan at all, and we all heard what their speeches was. Sumit Peer, I mean, I don't want to call it a roasting, okay, because introspection is what the Prime Minister called for, and it is a very important introspection. Prime Minister Modi has just asked the UN, in the time of a global pandemic, where is the UN? Where is the united global response? He says in dealing with the pandemic, where is the UN question mark? Where is the united global approach question mark? These are all questions that had to be asked. Sumit Peer.
I think, Rishabh, if you want to rate this speech, it is 10 out of 10. I mean, this cannot be a more perfect or explicit speech than this. And this is what we have been discussing, that we expect the Prime Minister will talk like this. That is what his character is. And what I like, he was very vocal and he was very explicit in highlighting all the concerns. The beautiful thing I like, Rishabh, he said, how long can the people of India wait? We have a lot of respect for UN, but again, we have a limit to our patience. We are 18% of the 1/6 of the humanity. You cannot keep us out of the primary decision making. Then he brought the brilliant part of what is UN doing about COVID? Because by challenging and asking about COVID, you are highlighting or hinting to the place or the country where the COVID started from, and UN has not been able to do anything. Third and the last thing he ended his speech brilliantly by saying, Santulan se Shaktikaran. If you are able to maintain the balance, that balance will only empower the UN. If that balance is not maintained, where India is the fulcrum of that balance, then
Okay.
the
Preeti Upala, Preeti Upala, making a promise that Indian vaccine production will be dedicated to the entire world. It won't be a nationalist cause. In America, for example, the primacy, they've not joined COVAX. They've already bought up, 300 million doses from all the principal vaccine manufacturers. But in the end, the manufacturing to the almost 1 billion dose a year capacity can only happen here in India. Making this announcement for an American audience across party lines, how is it going to reverberate there?
Oh, I think it's going to be, it's going to do wonderfully well. I think even before this speech, obviously, all eyes were on India because it's one of the few countries that has the scale and the scope to be the pharmacy for the world. It's already helped over 170 countries. And if there was a vaccine that somebody could trust, I think it would be one that's coming out of India and not one that's coming out of China. So I think this is where we need to put pressure.
So Preeti Upala, the context of HCQ was different, but the very fact that we did the HCQ supplies at a time when the world was still wondering and trying to figure out HCQ to the Americans became a huge issue with the Americans and Donald Trump. And I think personal thanks came there. If the vaccine supply now starts happening from India, understanding that regardless of the political spectrum, this is going to be a huge deal, this announcement during the time of an American election. Do we expect then this to be noted on with representatives both in the Biden camp and the Trump camp?
Well, I think at least from the current administration, yes, they've made foreign policy very much the heart of their own campaign. So I think this only helps them as well, and they can also reach out to the Indian American diaspora. But I think the Prime Minister made a great case for India as a global force multiplier and the force for good in the world, and a great example of what a country should be, and an example of what the other rogue elements are not doing. So I think he's done a great job.
Bang on. That's table slapping. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, generally UN speeches are supposed to be, very repetitive of the same tokenisms. This is anything but tokenism. I've never seen an Indian Prime Minister stand there and ask a very blatant question. Where is the UN united response in the middle of a pandemic? You guys need to introspect. Ambassador Prakash.
Absolutely right. And he started on that point. And his message, the question was loud and clear. And it's a fact that UN has not lived up to its expectations. Dr. Jaishankar said, our External Affairs Minister said it in February, that, and I'm paraphrasing him, that never in history has the UN been so ineffective. Imagine the world is facing the biggest crisis since the Second World War, and the UN Security Council does not have the time, inclination, or ability to discuss that. So obviously there is something wrong, something broken that needs to be fixed. And the other points of the Prime Minister, I liked when he mentioned that when we were strong, we did not harass anybody. And when we had difficulties,
We
did
didn't
not
burden.
depend on it.
Yes, we didn't burden anybody.
So, yeah. So, I mean, and the other points that my co-panelists are making. But the problem, Rishabh, is that people who are or countries which are in the position of taking decisions I don't think I don't want to say more, but they are not very amenable to bring about a
No,
change.
it's the laws of physics. It's called inertia, sir. It's a law of physics that applies to diplomacy as well. Nobody wants to
It is
bring
not
change.
just, Rishabh, it's not just inertia. It is a simple power play. And many countries do not want India to be in the
Well,
UN
they don't
Security
want,
Council.
and then the question that they have to ask themselves and answer it also, Jaidev Ranade, is the simplest of questions. How long will the 130 crore people of India wait? It's a very simple question, but it's a very powerful one.
It is. It is a very powerful one. And I think I'd like to make 3 points here. One is, in a manner of speaking, and if I can put it a bit starkly, he has put the UN on notice in a way that you have to actually start not mending your ways, but you have to start getting proactive. Second, you have to be fearless. He has said that by pointing at countries that have been remiss and to whom the UN has not addressed any issue. Like I think Mr. Peer said, where did the coronavirus come from? I mean, that has been raised and left. The third is, I think, that he has, in his speech, it was spoken from a position where he's addressing a global audience. He is not only focused on the problem that India has, and the whole world knows that today we are going through a tough time on our borders and otherwise, and he has not sort of got enmeshed in that. But I would also like to say that he made two other points that I would like to mention. One, he referred to the Made in India program in a manner of speaking. That
Yes.
we are going to build our capacities, we are going to improve our capacities, and he did say that will be a force multiplier for multilateralism and for trade. The second was, I think it was alluded to when he spoke about India being the pharmacy of the world and, supplying the vaccines to everyone.
Yeah.
I think would have gone down very,
Yeah,
very
I think
well.
that's the diplomatic coup. I was just mentioning this. That's the diplomatic coup. You have an American election coming up. It's going to become a huge thing for them because nobody else can supply those kind of quantity of vaccines anytime soon. And yeah, finish your thought, sir. Finish your thought, Jaidev Ranade.
And I think this reinforces the message of peace that we have been pushing all the time. And the Prime Minister himself has been saying that the whole world is a family. So I think this fits into that very well.
No, so we are reinforced the position of peace, but the question is being posed in the simplest possible terms. And that's the beauty of communication, of language, when you can phrase powerful things in the simplest possible terms. General Dawar, let me just quote this. More than 130 crore Indians have faith in the UN. But it is also true that India's people are awaiting UN reform. India's people are worried. Will this process ever reach a logical end? For how long can India be put out of decision-making structures? A country that's the biggest democracy, a country which has 18% of the world's population, a nation with great diversity. We have suffered both colonialism and have been a great power in the past. When we were strong, we bullied no one. When we were weak, we burdened no one. Till how long will we wait? General Dawar, that's a powerful question, but it's a simple one.
Yeah. The Prime Minister made a very statesmanlike and a very impassioned plea about the structuring of the United Nations, which has been long overdue, and most of the people in the world realize it. And I'm sure it will happen sooner than later. As far as he also, whatever he said, he he touched upon various problems which are afflicting the world. And which conveys what? It conveys one simple thing, that India has a global view, a world view of all the problems which are shared by the world. These are not Indian problems. These are global problems. And this is what the best thing I like.
Okay,
and I'm
but
glad
he's
he
raised
didn't
powerful question.
mention-
You say statesman-like, but in a statesman-like way, he's raised a powerful question that where is the UN in the middle of a global pandemic, which is the biggest global crisis in living memory? Where is the UN? What is the UN doing?
You see, all these things do take time. There are many complexities involved in, in the interplay of relations between, the original Security Council powers and the others. But, we have arrived on the world stage since some years, and nobody can deny us that privilege and the responsibility and the care and the concern which India always displays for the entire world.
Okay.
And that is where I was very happy.
I think
that
it was
talk
far
about
less subtle
Pakistan
than
or
just that.
China
Sri
or-
Iyer, great time to have you back on NewsX with us. Where was the UN? Asked India's Prime Minister in the middle of a pandemic. It's a very simple, straightforward question. Where was the UN?
Well, you saw what UN did. One of its undersecretaries actually has made a snarky comment based on a doctored video, and it is aimed at one of India's leaders, and then that person got kicked out. See, what is this coronavirus shown to the world? That many of these so-called global institutions, they've all gotten compromised. And money seems to speak louder than anything else. Witness what's been happening in the city councils across the United States. 7 city councils have passed anti-CAA resolution, verbatim, this almost the same text, all being produced and given to them by CAIR, Council for American Islamic Relations. And if you look at the CAIR, who are they? These guys are funded by some terrorist elements. And it's a known fact. It's not even like it's a possibility at all. So, but nobody is able to stop this. And I think UN also has fallen victim to similar kind of machinations. So if India becomes a member of the Security Council, I think that is a very, very significant positive development for India, because India can no longer be, pushed aside the way it has been in some of these resolutions. And I hope that happens. And overall, I think right now, everybody is trying to just stay alive, fighting, literally hanging in there, figuratively and physically.
Okay. Let's just take it one thing at a time. Sri Iyer making an announcement from a UN podium. I know he's not in New York, but from a UN podium saying that India's vaccine manufacturing will serve the world, which is basically to say that we will be fair and equitable in vaccine export out of India, without which any vaccine effort would have not worked for several years. How important is that statement for a global audience?
This vaccine business for COVID, it's going to take at least 18 more months before you can hang a hat on one vaccine and say this one is going to inhibit it. So what the best thing to do is for the population to try and learn how to immunize themselves.
True that. But I don't want to get into theory. I'm asking you a straightforward question, Sri Iyer. To make that commitment, the value of the commitment will only be valuable once the vaccine comes. But to say that like we gave you HCQ, we will also give you the vaccine, we won't just produce for India, it's a politically risky call back home, because he can be asked questions that how are you making these promises if you can't look after your own people?
Actually, scaling up output in pharma industry is not that difficult. And I think that's what he is thinking about it. He must have done his math. Look, India has always stepped up to the plate whenever the world asked of it for getting more pharma.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a pulse check. Ambassador Prakash, making that promise, how important has that been in that speech?
For me, that was one of the 3 biggest takeaways, rather the salient takeaway. And let us also be clear, he did not say that it will be made available free. India has a track record of making available very critical medications, just as we did for HIV/AIDS, at a very, very competitive price. So as the world's pharmacy, we will take care of our own needs, the needs of the neighborhood, and reach out to the world without any discrimination. And that message, Rishabh, will resonate powerfully, not so much in Washington or the major capitals, but across the world.
Yes, big move. I just want to take it one at a time. Jaidev Ranade, to the audiences which are going to be self-interested audiences. Everybody is running their self-interest in the UN. they are friends of India only because they're interested in being friends of India. This message to a self-interested audience, when it gets reported and reflected in various international capitals, I'm assuming this is going to be the biggest takeaway.
You're absolutely correct, and I would like to re-word what you said. And I would say that every human is going to pay a lot of attention to this, regardless of what nationality he is. This will address every human's prime concern today. Whenever the vaccine comes, maybe tomorrow, if I'm being highly optimistic, but at least within the next few months, the biggest problem will be making it available to everyone.
Bang on.
Now, he's given everyone hope that the world's largest producer of vaccines is going to make no distinction. And
okay, Sumit Peer, takeaway. Biggest for a global audience, this is going to be huge. That this is the commitment. So when it comes to, if you want to partner with us, we are willing to put the first step forward. We are pulling, literally, maybe you want to be handshaking in COVID times, but we are willing to reach out. And in turn, you need to introspect. Sumit Peer.
I think, Rishabh, this is a global political masterstroke by a genius politician. That is what I say, because this concerns 7 billion people. What they look, can I get a vaccine? What is China been doing? China is coming up with a fake vaccine and entrapping people with a $1 billion loan. You buy my vaccine and I'm saying you are loan to buy that. To dismantle that China's propaganda, we have set the ball rolling. It's a global diplomatic masterstroke, Rishabh, because this is exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, just hold your thought on that. I want to pick up another question before that.
We'll give you the vaccine. We have the credibility. We have given them HCQ to 170 countries. We have the trust. We have the credibility. World trusts us. World believes us. And it has come from nobody else than the Prime Minister of India. It is also a vaccine to the campaign of President Donald Trump. It's going to have President Donald Trump a lot.
Okay, General Rawat, that one singular statement which has taken a position of India's approach going ahead for the next 4, 5, 6 months, maybe a year, sir. How? I mean, this has to be the most significant takeaway to global capitals at least.
Yes, definitely. But now the point is we have to ensure that whatever vaccine we are making, you know, this timeline is very, very important because the pandemic is raging and raging ferociously all over the world. So now we have to live up to this promise. And I hope that whichever companies are now involved in the development of this, also, I'm sure they must be feeling the urgency for it. And it will do India a great, I would say our flag would be flying very, very high.
Okay, here's the bottom line in this numbers. 800 million doses a year is what one single company, the Serum Institute of India, can manufacture. 800 million doses a year. The closest that can be done anywhere in Europe or anywhere else in the world is 100 million. So there is no comparison of India's vaccine production capacity. And of course, that's going to be ramped up further. But the next important thing, Preeti Upala making specific mention of the micro loans to women, of 26 weeks of paid maternity leave, of a solar alliance. Now, he's not reminding Indians. We know that this is the fact. He is reminding a liberal audience in America that this is a fact. Preeti.
Oh, yes, sorry. Absolutely. I mean, I hope that they're listening wide and deeply, because I think they just keep, believing in, they're so indoctrinated and they're so clueless about India, and yet they have a lot to say. I think India is one of the most diverse countries, is the most pro-women countries in the world. Some of the steps that this government has taken for women, things like the maternity leave, and also, of course, the environment and so on. It's a leader in many ways.
Okay, but the need and understanding, Preeti Upala, to understand that we have to, this is an onion which we have to crack. We have to peel this apart, because no matter what India does, the lobby is so deeply entrenched that it doesn't, that everything Narendra Modi is going to do is not going to be perfect for everybody in the world, right? But in the end, he's an Indian Prime Minister. He's being tainted in a way that they need a reminder of these things that are being done here.
They do, and it's a shame that a global pandemic was not that reminder. It really should have been. Look, I must say, the one silver lining in all of this is these media houses, the Western mainstream media and so on, they're losing credibility by the day on so many other issues. So at some point, we can just ignore what they have to say.
I don't understand why they don't get it. I don't want to be I'm in the profession, right? So I don't want to say, okay, all you guys are like Donald Trump, all you guys are fake news. But I have a reminder to the American press, we are not a death to America country. We are not. But if this is what you keep on doing, that if Indians die in a terror attack, it's militancy. But when a terror attack happens in America, oh my God, we need to go after Osama. Then invading Pakistan and going to Pakistan is no problem. We do a surgical strike, you pretend it never happened. Sri Iyer, the recognition of the need that this is something that now needs to be cracked. How do you in the New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, Al Jazeera now condemn India for giving 26 weeks of maternity leave, for putting a solar alliance in place, for giving microloans to women? How do you do it? I mean, I'm sure they'll try, but how?
Well, these guys are bankrupt intellectually and also physically, so they are getting funding from God knows where. So this is the reason why you see the media in such a bad shape right now. I think India has found a way to effectively crack the whip. Watch what happened with Malaysia. Mahathir Mohamad was making some loudmouth statements. What happened? India stopped importing palm oil. Then Mahathir finds himself out of a job. So this is the kind of whipping that you need to do. And soon enough, I have a feeling that the Democrats have gotten themselves into quicksand by doing these city council resolutions. Now they are trying to walk it back. It is not going to happen. So there is a tipping point now.
We had the same conversation of the Labour Party when they did the same thing with their Kashmir resolution. Same thing. They don't seem to get it. It's just unbelievable that you hire Pakistanis as your chief advisors. Then you parrot what they say, right? And you can't tell the difference between a military dictatorship and a democracy. I'm not saying we don't have problems or that Narendra Modi is the most perfect individual in the world. There'll be disagreements in worldviews. So be it. We are in for our own self-interest. You be in for your own. But there's something broken here. Okay. Let's come to the crux of what the maximum amount of the speech was. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, a reminder that if the UN was created to prevent World War III, just because World War III hasn't happened doesn't mean the UN has been a success. Now, what is the Prime Minister here indicating?
Well, he's stating the obvious, Rishabh, but there are 2 or 3 important factors at play here. One, the framers of the structure or the charter of UN did not want UN to be a powerful organization. Let's face it. The 5 permanent members have a veto so that the activities can be stalled if they require, unless there is a consensus. And the only time there was a consensus was in 1991 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. So, and then the UN is starved for funds. It does not have an enforcement mechanism. So the structure is such.
Okay.
And also the fact remains that the permanent members are very comfortable in their positions. They do not want status quo to be disrupted unless it's forced upon them. It will not be given to us for this just because.
Okay, Ambassador Prakash, is this then in what we know of Narendra Modi, what we know of a new approach of India? Should this speech be taken with a pinch of salt as a speech, or are you seeing this as indicative of a different kind of more practical resolve that we will now see being brought to bear? Ambassador Prakash.
Oh, yeah. No, it is not a resolve. I think it is some plain speak that it's about time that India engaged in, and we are engaging in that. What impact it will have, I am not sure. But certainly we cannot keep waiting ad infinitum.
Yes.
Question, last point, Rishabh, is that also what is the choice? Some experts say walk out. I don't think walking out is a choice. So you have to stay in, you have to hammer away, and you have to do your best.
No, but I think he has not said we are walking out. In fact, he said 130 crore Indians, and he's of course representing the people of India. But he's also left with a warning. If you lose legitimacy, if all of us sitting here feel the UN has no legitimacy, we will start ignoring it. And if we start ignoring it, whether you are in or out doesn't make a difference, because then we have to realize as a country, we have to worry about other things. And there is a danger in that. And I tell that to the Americans also. We are not a death to America country. But if you keep treating India the way you do, what happens? What happens? We will remember the reason there are a lot of people in this country, even though China is staring in the face, are very reticent of an alliance with the US is because we remember what Nixon did and what Kissinger did when you sent the 7th Fleet, and that is not to America's benefit. And here's a problem that I'm just coming back to you, Ambassador Jaidev Ranade. Is this indicative of just speech making, or are you now getting the impression, is the pulse telling you that proactive measures are now going to come after?
I think what we will see is a revival of our interest in getting into the UN Security Council, which is, there's been a lull in that for a while. So I think we will see that getting reinvigorated. And the other aspect is when he said that we are going to take a greater interest in the peacekeeping operations, etc. This is again something which shows that we are going to get into the nuts and bolts of the UN functioning. I think it is a good sign. It shows that as big players, we are going to make our presence felt. Third point it makes is, and this is addressed particularly, though indirectly, to the US, UK and France, that look, you have China today muscling into the UN and to the other organizations. We've just had Xi Jinping talk about how China supplies provides the largest number of peacekeeping soldiers. Position India in so many words. So I do expect that we will see a revival or a re-energization of our...
I'm going to come to that, because obviously that is the obvious juxtaposition. Sumit Peer, but now what do we follow up? The follow-up of the speech is going to be the test of mettle. Now you've done the brownie points to the world and reminded them that you need us for the vaccine and we're going to give it, right? We'll do the responsible thing, unlike the Chinese. But when our bill comes, our due comes, and we are simply asking for our due, we're not asking for any ruddy favors from you. When our due comes, when we sit in January on the UNSC as a non-permanent member, this is what we demand of you. How do we now make this into actionable goals?
I think, Rishabh, the first thing is that what we have seen is a change of paradigm today. Today, we were not politically correct, but we were correct. That is the first difference I saw from the last speech and last so many speeches in this film. Whatever we need, whatever we want, whatever we demand, we have put it in front of the world. And in the end, there are two important things I want to say. Prime Minister said, Honorable Prime Minister said, we make friends not to hurt anybody. We do development at not the cost of others. It's not like China debt traps and cannibalism of their economy. And in the last, he ended his speech with beautiful words. Santulan and Shaktikaran. That is, if you balance it out, then only the organization will be empowered. If you don't balance it out, the organization will lose its power, and in a way, 1.3 billion Indians are putting you on a notice saying we demand.
Well, there is often a view that change comes slowly, that nothing actually really ever changes. Dramatic things can happen. You ask the British, they'll tell you dramatic things happened in 1066. We all know what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were dramatic things. The invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939 was a dramatic event. Things changed, and they changed rather rapidly. Within a span of a few years, 60 million people were dead, and the entire world order had been drafted, which is what the problem is 80 years later. General Dawar, till when do we buy into this supposition that, things never really change and we are simply in it for the long haul and just, let's keep struggling along?
No. Nobody's saying that you keep struggling along. And as I mentioned earlier, that the entire world, even those countries which are inimical to our interests, they also know, they also acknowledge both privately and publicly also that India has to be in the Security Council. There is no question about that. But I think where our MEA, our diplomacy has to, work through the maze of all these complexities. I mean, there are conflicting interests of India and the others, and the Chinese will always like to use their veto power and things like that.
But General Dawar, you know, when is complexity replaced with clarity? It took a Churchill and an FDR to sit on board a ship in the Atlantic and say, okay, here's 8 points we agree to in a letter, and this is the clarity for the world that is now going to be after us. Dramatic events were happening at that point of time, and within 4 years, the entire world order had been redrafted.
Rishabh, we have to reach out to the world. We have to, for example, this COVID vaccine is a very good example that if we can supply it to the world, we are doing very well in UN peacekeeping operations. So we have to, you know, send out our soft power to the entire world and not only to the region, where they say, okay, please come and join the Security Council, because the world cannot do without India's support and India's presence. I'm afraid we cannot just walk into the Security Council.
No, we can't. I mean, we would want to, but we can't. But in this, Vishnu Prakash, memory serves me correctly, the last time when the world was galvanized around one singular cause was I think 9/11, right? When you had consensus. But even then, now we are here 20 years later, we still can't come up with a definition on terrorism. After all the galvanization on terrorism. When a moment like this has come our way, and there is many reasons we are all galvanized as a human race right now, even now if we can't bring change, then what is it? Fool me once, fool me twice?
Well, we will be fooled 100 times and we will be successful 100 times. That's the nature of the game. Rishabh, you know it as well as I do, and we all do. There is nothing in black and white in international relations. There are all shades of gray. We can keep on discussing it, but it will happen. It will happen. It may continue like this for a few years, maybe more. Maybe there is a black swan event and things change. So, I mean, you cannot predict that. But tomorrow is something. Now, just hypothetically, if the world finally understands the damage that China is causing and they unite, things can happen. But I don't see that happening in a hurry.
Yeah, I don't see it happening either. Very strangely so. There's a lot of build-up that's happened. But then we are now sort of, nobody wants to call each other's bluff kind of moments. A very, very weird situation now we are in. And that's very, very troubling. Sri Iyer, can we never have a moment of truth in our lifetimes?
Not weird, Rishabh, it is very normal.
It's a normal situation. I am a person still looking for a moment of truth. There have been others to offer. Yes, the independence of struggle of India took many, many decades to fructualize. But in the end, the UK voting public decided that they no longer required the services of the man who had just won them the Second World War. He was kicked out within months of peace in Europe. And a new chap who came in, Clement Attlee, said, we not only want out of India, we want out of India so quickly that, we want to forget about it rather quickly. And they were out within 2 years. A moment of truth did arrive. Is it in the reckoning, in the near future, or never happening? Sri Iyer.
No, I think it's going to happen soon. I'll tell you what. America starts its election, its voting in 2 weeks from now, because everybody is going to send in their mail-in ballots, and those things are supposed to arrive a month ahead of the elections. So between now and October 3rd, for example, you're going to see whatever optics that people are going to see. It's going to make their mind as to who they want to select 4 years from for the next 4 years. And it is my contention that the race is really tight right now. We don't know which way it's going to go. I'm telling you, sitting in ground zero here in the United States, it is not as one-sided as some media organizations want you to believe. It is quite tight. And remember, American voting system is not the same as in, say, India. The one that gets the most number of votes is not going to be the president. The one who gets the most number of delegates is the one who's going to be the president.
We've learned that famously now.
There's a key difference. And also, I want to finish one thing that you mentioned. In 1973, India did not have the soft power in the United States that it does now. Everybody knows that the Indian workforce, India is considered the ideal immigrant. The Indian American is considered the ideal immigrant. They put their heads down, they work hard, they usually keep their nose out of politics, and only when they are provoked do they take a stand. So now, Indian Americans are waking up to the power they have, especially in 12 battleground states. I'm telling you, there are 12 battleground states that everybody needs to watch out. That's what's going to decide the next president of America. And it's those people who are going to say, well, we want Trump or we want guidance.
We always keep looking for seminal moments, and all my long years of covering foreign policy, all every diplomat has ever told me is that in any bilateral that happens, do not look for a seminal moment. It's all incremental change. But nonetheless, there are momentums, tides, and ideas that once come that when they do bring change, the change happens very, very rapidly. The Chinese certainly think that such a moment has come, that they intend to bring upon very rapid change on many multiple fronts. For the rest of us now to presume that it is absolutely impossible will perhaps also cause us to have a rethink. This is in the context of the very, very intriguing speech and a very, very direct speech. Haven't heard that from an Indian Prime Minister addressing these issues in such a direct fashion at the UN in a very long period of time. But this boils down to realpolitik, brass tacks. This is what we keep boiling it down to. So let's have that conversation. Jaydev Ranade, in the end, another global event is coming our way in just over a month and a half, an American election. Does it matter to us?
Yes, of course it matters to us. Let me put it in a broader context. What we just saw today, our Prime Minister making a statement at a speech at the UN, where he has spelled out what India wants and where India is headed. And then we have a US presidential election coming up, which may mean a change of course for the United States or a continuation. But what happens there? What is happening is a change in the global balance of power. And I think we need to keep that in mind. We are headed towards either two camps or one country getting increasingly isolated, which one I'm talking about. And here, I think India has a chance. The Prime Minister has seen that chance and he has made a bid. Now let us see how it happens. There is already voices in the WHO questioning China's presence and in the Human Rights Commission questioning China's presence there. That can grow.
Okay.
But I think...
Okay, so let me reverse the question, Jaydev Ranade. For many Americans who probably still can't find India on a map, if it matters to us, in the context of an American election, what do we matter to them? Is it just diaspora votes? Is that the only thing that matters?
Well, it does matter to them. The Indian presence today, the Indian diaspora has an influence there. Not, the word like I've been Bangalore has come. I mean, people know which country it is associated with.
But that's in a negative context, obviously. Yes.
India is known as a country with tremendous resources, a country that is on the rise. And today, I think we have a very positive image in the United States.
Okay, same question to you, Preeti Upala. It might matter to us. An American election always matters to many countries across the globe. Do we matter to them?
Absolutely. I mean, since 2014, I think India has really been on the global stage, and that's thanks to Modi and his sort of superstar statesman-like, demeanor. I think more. I mean, I work in international media here, and like it or not, hey, even negative publicity sometimes is good publicity. It's important that they're talking about India. And I'm seeing so many news pieces, articles, conversations about it, negative and positive. I think the important thing for us is to obviously raise awareness and get the facts and educate them and inform them on the real stance of the government and so on. But,
where is that coming from, Preeti Upala? Is that coming from, an Indian diplomatic machinery under Narendra Modi understanding the pulse of Donald Trump very well? Is it about that, or is it about the realization, what we keep talking, that India is transforming? Is that happening, or are we still backwater, third world, petty $3 trillion economy? Who cares?
I think nobody can ignore India's place today in the world, its great rise. Post-COVID especially, nobody wants an alternative like China. I mean, India is like the natural sort of counter to that. But I think the Prime Minister has done a great job. I wouldn't give the credit to diplomats so much. I would actually give the credit to the Prime Minister himself and his own personal chemistry with President Trump and this administration. I think they've done a fantastic job. But nobody can ignore India's rise, how it's a global a force for good in the world, and on every facet that you see.
Well, you're hopeful and optimistic, but in real terms, when if a Narendra Modi goes there, it's still second page or third page news, and if a Donald Trump comes to India, it's of course non-stop coverage. General Dawar, in a very real perspective of where things stand, how important is this American election going to be for us, and does it matter honestly which way it ends up?
Without going into who should win and who India wants to win, and because there are divided opinion even in India. Let me tell you, as far as the lady just mentioned, India's stature has been rising since the turn of the century. Okay, I mean, and the fact remains that since the nuclear deal, India and US have come closer, have come strategically closer. That's a fact of life. Let's not wish that away. And why is India important to the US? Because apart from being the largest democracy, we have all the resources in the world. We have got 18% of the world's population. We are doing very well. And if America knows that if they want to keep China at bay, well, India has to be in the forefront. It's as simple as that. If you want a rules-based maritime order in the Indo-Pacific, India has to play its role. India has to play its role not only in South Asia, in the entire Asia. What is the Quad? The Americans know the importance of it and things like that.
Okay.
So India, whoever comes to power there, whether the Democrats or Republicans, I'm sorry, the importance and the stature of India is non-negotiable. No strategist can now ignore India. We are a power we are a global power in the making. So the point is, India.
The self-evidency of this gets reflected where, General Dawar? Do we reflect it in the fact that Google and Facebook are now trying to invest in Indian companies? Do we reflect it in the fact that they are now willing to sell weaponry to us like they were not before, maybe even do technology transfer? What's the translation of this?
Yes, very good question. All this, the bonhomie between the political leadership of India and US naturally will translate itself to military support, to economic, linkages and things like that. And now with the China factor coming in, I think if Indo-American relations take a great jump, somebody will have to thank China also for it, because China is getting themselves isolated in this thing. And we are also very keen. For example, you take South Asia. Now you take Afghanistan.
Sir.
The Americans want to get out, have an exit strategy, leaving Afghanistan in a mess. Now that is where India must come in and tell them that, look, you cannot leave Afghanistan like this. So things like that, there is strategic congruence now building up between America.
I think there you have it. Congruence, conflicts of interest, and yes, it has to become conflicts of interest. Or democracy and all that is all very well, but there has to be a confluence of interest. Yes, finish your thought.
Sorry, you didn't get me. I said, Rishabh, what I said, there is strategic congruence on a lot of matters between India and America, which affects and impacts both the countries. Militarily.
No, you're bang on. So what I was saying was, we often talk about democracies, but in the end, there has to be a confluence of interest. And not only is it happening between India and America, it's happening because the American interests in many, many countries, India is pivotal to a lot of these countries. But Jaidev Ranade, in boiling it down to brass tacks, the last great seminal pivotal moment was when an Indian Prime Minister risked his government. Literally, it came down to 2 or 3 votes. Manmohan Singh could have lost a vote of confidence to get the Indo-US nuclear deal through. George Bush went out of his way, arm twisted even the Chinese to get it done. In real world terms, other than technology transfer and getting India out of the technology blacklist, it's not like we got 2,000 nuclear reactors out of the deal. But if that was the game changer, which is the one in real world terms happening right now?
I think what we are seeing is today that we are in a very delicate situation. And there were 2 moments that I think are important. One was the manner in which we projected and got probably almost every country except the rogue countries to accept our call on terror. Everyone backed it, and I think it pushed 2 countries into a corner particularly. The second is the manner in which we are today having a rub with our northern neighbor. And that is because of the rise in our stature, because of their concerns that we are actually growing to be a challenge, and because of their concerns that we are therefore becoming a nation of interest for the United States. So I won't say it's a seminal moment as yet. It's a seminal moment that is in the process, and we are poised right in the middle to either make it and get our rightful
Okay, so
place.
let's just chart it out for people watching us. What is the logic here? Sumit Peer, help me work this out. Okay, so I mentioned that the biggest American companies are now making high profile investments here in India, right? Because data companies in India are going to become very, very important. So while the Americans are trying to blacklist Chinese firms from America doing business with Huawei, etc., money is coming here in very real terms. When it came to Kashmir, OIC has backed off from what Pakistan and Turkey want to do. Trump mentioned a couple of times that, I'm happy to mediate, but that was him just talking. In the end, when it came to surgical strike 1, surgical strike 2, surgical strike 3, not a peep was heard from any global capital. Let's ignore Washington Post, New York Times. In real terms, nobody said anything, did anything. Mike Pompeo has been very strongly talking on the Indo-Tibet border and the Chinese aggression over there. These are real things that are changing in a very real way. Can you see another trend here that is building up to some sort of seminal moment?
I think, Rishabh, after COVID was the tipping point. COVID was the point which brought the relations to a threshold point. Because after the COVID, America realized that China is somebody who cannot be trusted, and Democrats were the people who got China into the America. In fact, Barack Obama was their brand ambassador. That's what President Donald Trump says, quote unquote. Now, in these tough times, you cannot think of a geopolitical situation without Asia in consideration. If you need an anchor in Asia, if you need a power in Asia which is economically and politically as strong for you to have a hold or a control in Asia, you have two options between India and China. So, but naturally, India is that alliance or that ally which you have to pick, because we are not there to take over your economy.
But what do you see? Do I see what is the example of that? Wishes were horses, Sumit Peer. What is the example? Is the example the Apache sale, the Chinook sale, the Howitzer sale? Is it offering the F-35, which we for some reason don't want to take? Is it not sanctioning us after S-400? What is the example of that?
Rishabh, 2 points are here. The first of all is all the latest machinery or the equipment which is coming with technology transfer. No US sanctions, and I think are working. Second thing is, when China tried to rise the ante, US moved its warships to South China Sea. What more do you want to see as a proof of concept?
Okay.
What are US 5 warships doing in South China Sea?
Do we have a side? I know it's not black and white, Sriya here, but is there a better call for us? Does it matter to us who wins in November?
I don't think that the US foreign policy is going to change a lot if the Democrats were to come to power. After all, foreign policy is like a big ship, and that gets steered in its own way. There is a think tank that works on that. My concern here is that people of the United States need to choose wisely, because the next 4 years is going to determine how the world order is going to be 10, 20, 15, 10, 20, 50 years down the road. That is the most important thing, because today the world has not found China guilty yet of whatever happened in Wuhan. Was that a lab-induced experiment gone wrong? Maybe. Nobody has actually sat in judgment, taken a look at the evidence and said, yes, this is something that was manufactured in the lab, that got let out, and because of that, China must be punished. There will be compensatory damage, and there will be punitive damages. These things have not even been, coming up in the vision of people. So for all that to happen, United States needs to show the way. I hope for once the American public looks at this long-term view, that as the leader of the free world, United States has a responsibility not only to itself but to the whole world, and choose its
all right, you're saying choose wisely. Okay, you're saying choose wisely, of course, sitting, and any person committed to democracy should obviously be saying that. Vishnu Prakash, does it matter to us? I mean, I've already discussed the traditional logic. As migrants and Indian diaspora would often think that a democratic government is going to be far better for them than a conservative one. All our 20, 30 years of foreign policy have taught us that the opposite is true. A George Bush in his 8 years were far more friendly than a Clinton and Obama that he was sandwiched in between. Does it matter?
The frank answer is yes, no, and maybe. Now, let me on a serious note, let me build on that. Let me build on that. even the diasporic disposition is changing. They are tilting towards the Republican, that is one. When it comes to India's national interests, historically, Republicans have been more responsive. But the Democrats have been more open in terms of getting Indians in. Now, you asked a very pertinent question. When Prime Minister Modi goes to the US, it's page 3. When Trump comes to India, it's page 1. It's very simple, my friend. And Clinton said it. It is the economy, stupid. And it all boils down to the economic size, the economic muscle. And as India's economic attraction is growing, the attitudes are changing, plus the stature of diaspora. So wrap up, there are push factors and pull factors. These are the pull factors, and the push factor is a friendly country called, what my good friend Jaydev Ranade calls a northern neighbor, because he doesn't know the name of the friendly country. So,
no, he's more than happy to call out China. Don't worry. He's more than happy. he's trying to out-diplomat you.
So these are some of the factors. But last point, for the last 20 years, look at the graph of the relationship. And the relationship is growing. We are not, India-US relations are not prejudicial to each other's interest.
Yeah.
And I would believe that the relationship will keep growing.
Okay, Preeti Uppala, is it true? Is there a diasporic a change of heart? Did we see it in the last election? Because as I mentioned, the paradox, the dichotomy exists. For Indian Americans in a democratic setup is going to be more migrant friendly, more H1B, etc. friendly. But when it comes to India, that's completely the opposite.
Absolutely. There's been a real shift, I think, in the diaspora in the last, since 2016, to be honest. And I think the diaspora is kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, they feel like they align with the values espoused supposedly by the Democratic Party, but then they look at the antagonistic stance and they just feel like the Republicans are better for foreign policy and India's national security and vis-a-vis terrorism and vis-a-vis Pakistan. So it's not an easy decision for them.
But I think, how does Pakistan? What do they have the right lobby firm? How do they still wield, the influence that they wield in America?
They have probably the most sophisticated, seductive lobby in the world. The fact that they're able to get away with essentially selling a bridge to the US, taking them for a ride for decades, and essentially, thwarting their peace plans in Afghanistan and being paid billions for it. They should be teaching the world how to do this. It's a shame that we don't have a lobby. Forget about strong lobby. We don't really have a lobby at all.
Okay, I'm hoping we're getting better. I've been working for many months with one other individual in this panel, trying to expose a lot of the people who do the Pakistani lobbying. Maybe we need to get back to that for the American election period. But Sri Iyer, is there a palpable shift? Are you seeing a palpable shift where an Indian American says that, okay, even though Trump is, not the right guy if I want to be betting on my next H1B visa, but for my country is far more important, so therefore that changes my vote?
Yeah, I think you are going to see a shift. I don't know how much the needle is going to move. Is it going to move enough in those 12 battleground states to give it to Trump? I don't know, because we have to look at the numbers. 4 million Indian Americans, only about 1 million actually cast their vote, because many people are going through the green card process and all that stuff. So the numbers don't really matter much in terms of, they don't look as big as, for example, if you look at the Islamic bloc, that's also 4 million, but almost all of them can vote because they came in as immigrants or refugees and so on and so forth. So this is why, Democrats are playing this game. They are playing this numbers game, saying if this or this, one gives you 1 million, maybe a lot of money, but the other one gives you 4 million votes. This is a cold math that is being done by the Democrats. I hope that they won't toe the same line once they come to power, and I don't think they will. They're always going to be realistic once they come to power. But what is happening now? this thing about 7 city councils passing resolution. It's been dragged through the mud. And in social media, if you look at it, a lot of Indian Americans who never bothered about the American politics are suddenly waking up to the reality that, wait a minute.
Well, you've given me my debate.
Why are these guys doing this?
Well, you've given me my debate topic for tomorrow. Let's come back tomorrow and discuss this. I need to take a break. Before that, let me just quickly go across to all our panelists. Jaydev Ranade, just on this thought, a big moment is going to happen. We don't know if the vaccine comes out before that. Probably not. It's going to be difficult. Donald Trump's rhetoric on China is absolutely through the roof. What's he going to do really before or after the election to actually do something against China? I mean, he's only been following us with TikTok bans, and that also TikTok is now being bought out. So it doesn't really matter. In a sense, other than send some aircraft carriers, what has he done?
Well, I'd say that he's really started changing the dynamics in US-China relations. In fact, he's put China under a lot of pressure. And let me tell you something about what the people in Beijing are saying right now. And I'm talking about the leadership there. They are pretty worried about what Trump might do. So Xi Jinping has told his armed forces to play it cool and not to fire the first shot, because he says that the Americans are waiting for just such a chance. So that's what Trump has done. He is changing the relationship. And I would like to make 2 comments here as far as India and the US are concerned. Firstly, we don't share borders, so there's no problem there. Second, I think we both belong to a world which is free. That's why it's called a free world. We have democracies. We have very noisy democracies, in fact, and parliaments, etc. And the third is, as someone told me, a very, I won't mention the name, but a very senior person in the American establishment, when we were talking about the 5G. And he said, look, whom would you like to listen in to your conversation? Because someone is listening in any case. You want the Chinese with whom you have a problem, or you want the Americans who are far away?
Oh, great. I think it's called what is the lesser of the two evils or the two devils? Okay. I'm out of time. General Dawar, quick last thought from you, sir. In an American election context, 1 month from now, has everything possible that could have happened has happened now is down to rhetoric, or are we still expecting, something of a surprise from Donald Trump when it comes to China?
Rhetoric will continue till the last day before polling, but Donald Trump can put a rabbit out of the hat, which tilts the balance, all these swing states and things like that, and swing votes. So he can do anything. And I wouldn't be very much surprised that if he does something dramatic.
Something dramatic, and I think that's as indicated from General Dawar that we'll pull out this evening. Something dramatic. Sumit Peer, 30 seconds. The Prime Minister has said what he has said. I'm going to pick up on the other side, of course, with a transliteration of what it means. I'm getting in Uyghur activists, Tibetan activists on the other side to pick this up with me. But in real world terms, what changes now? Are we seeing something that is going to happen after it has been spoken of?
I think, Rishabh, the first thing is to speak clear and let the world know we have a problem. This is the major change what has happened today. 1.3 billion people have problem with the setup, and we do not accept it, and we are putting you on a notice and giving you time to change it. Else, we have to look for options. We are as clear and as explicit as that.
I'm sorry to boil it down to. I'm sorry to boil it down to human psychology, but when if you're sometimes too good a student sitting on the front bench, you get taken for granted, and all the attention goes to the bad boys and the bullies sitting at the back. If you've experienced that, then here is a reality check. International politics often not much different. China gets all the attention because A, it's an big economic power, and B, because it's behaving in the way it's behaving. If it had been behaving nicely, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I take a break. Thank you all of you for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.